Nataki Garrett is the artistic director of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, whoop, whoop, one of the largest theater producing organizations in the US, and she is widely recognized as an innovative and influential arts leader. Across her career, Garrett has fostered and developed new work, having directed and produced the world premieres of vital contemporary playwriting voices, including Katori Hall, Brandon Jacobs Jenkins, and Aziza Barnes, and has been at the vanguard of adapting and devising new ways of performing the classics. Since becoming Oregon Shakespeare Festival's artistic director in 2019, she has led the 85-year-old institution through one of the most cataclysmic periods in its history, raising $19 million while mobilizing federal support for the nonprofit theater industry during the pandemic. At the start of her tenure, she conceived an interactive and immersive digital platform, O, which became all the more vital in the live theater's absence as a source of groundbreaking performance art and discussion. Nataki Garrett is a recipient of the first ever Ammerman Prize for Directing given by Arena Stage. She also received the National Endowment for the Arts and Theater Communications Group Career Development Fellowship for Theater Directors. She has served on nominating committees for countless awards supporting artists around the world. She is also a member of the Stage Directors and Choreographers Society and a member of the Board of Directors for Theater Communications Group, a company member at Woolly Mammoth, and an advisory board member for Mixed Blood Theater. Her approach to revitalizing classical theater is driven by both an appreciation for these works and a desire to expand their visions and audiences with new models of access. Nataki Garrett has said, which I love, "I'm actually really blessed to be one of the gatekeepers, because I'm going to hold that gate open as wide as I can for as long as I can for as many people to come through." Everybody in the audience, I present to you Nataki Garrett.
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. Thank you. I appreciate, also I appreciate the flavor with which you read it, because I don't think I've ever heard it like that. Thank you for that, sister. So I'm going to ask each of the participants to introduce yourselves. And let's start with you, Nicole.
Gosh, my spirit. Do you hear me? My spirit, Nataki. Just asking the folks that are present, sending love to all of the boxes here, uplifting people as they do that work. We know that there's so much context, so much history, so much backstory that we all had to go through. So just wanted to lift you up and make sure that people are sending you some love. Hello, every day and every time. I'm Nicole Brewer. My pronouns are she and her. I named myself in the space today as a community-held single mother. I am days away from turning 40, so I named that in the space as well. I would also say I'm a tall, dark-skinned, fat, happy Black woman, right? And so naming that in the space of the blessings that I have that I carry forward. And I show up in the theater industrial complex as a director, as an anti-racist theater maker, meaning I'm centering this lens of anti-racism in my decision-making and in my relationships, putting relationships first over things or stuff or being transactional. I show up as a writer activist, writing only when I can't find what it is that I need to be made whole or to heal from working and surviving in the theater industrial complex. I'm an educator who is currently employed at the School of Drama, which is at Yale. And I feel like there's another thing that I do in the world. I facilitate anti-racism, the anti-racist theater approach that I piece together by the wisdom of many, many, many others. So that's the way I'd like to be named in this space today. Thank you for the opportunity.
I love it. I love it. Karen, would you like to speak to who you are in the world?
Yes. I am humble today, y'all. I can't even, I'm like, this is like being on a panel with the Avengers. I have to just put that into the space. My name is Karen Olivo. I go by KO. I use they, them pronouns. I'm on the unceded land of the Ho-Chunk, which is also known as Madison, Wisconsin. I'm in complete transformation. that is where I am. These last 2 years have turned me upside down and inside out, and I'm embracing being undone by it. My job right now is as an educator at the University of Cincinnati, Cincinnati Conservatory of Music. I don't want to say that I'm an activist because I feel like I don't know nearly enough yet. I step into the space though as a somatic abolitionist. I live that every single day, and I hope that this conversation can set me on a course for more change and to facilitate change specifically in educational spaces. I have a host of things that I did in my former life, which were acting. And I hold that with some reverence, but I don't hold it with any sort of, with any ego. I feel like that was somebody else. So I'm ready to be transformed. Thank you for having me in this space.
Thank you for being here. And Sharrell?
Wow, you know, how I want to be in the space. You know, I'd like to call in Beverly and James Luckett, my parents. This Friday would have been my mom's birthday. And I know that Rodessa Jones always calls her parents into the space. And the older I get, the more I understand why. So that's who I'm repping today, Beverly and James Luckett, and doing this work with Black Acting Methods. Just so grateful to be here.
So let me just speak a little bit to why I said yes before we move forward with the panel and the questions. Sharrell, you reached out to me a few years back to be involved in the writing of your book about Black acting methods, and I remember when that happened, I was thinking to myself, like, why me? Not really having a real engagement about the way in which I could be effective in reaching people through writing about or speaking to what it is that I did as a teacher when I was a teacher. And recently I had this conversation with somebody who shared something with me, which is why I said yes to this. And that is, I spent so much time when I was in the academy avoiding these moments of real harmful racism, like that academy style racism, where they use the books and the words and the language and the white supremacy is emboldened because it's sort of embedded in the way that those systems were built. They use that against you every time you start to express that this shouldn't be like this. And I could avoid conflict in all kinds of ways. I could be like the Matrix, how that moment in the Matrix where that lady lays all the way back to get that bullet away from her, right? I could be like that in these moments, like stealthy, just get out of the way and clear it, right? And then my students started coming to me to say that they had experiences, and all of those experiences were similar to my experiences in the same school where I went to graduate school, where I had worked to avoid how I experienced. I coped with it. And so I feel like the energy that is coming towards you, if you don't figure out a way to take it and brace yourself for it, you're talking about generations behind you are coming and they're going to receive it too. And so I feel like this conversation is another one of those where I have to be really conscious of what it means to leave these edges frayed, to not snatch our edges, as a culture, and not to snatch the edges of the cultures in which we ask our young people to engage. So I like the question, what is it that we're trying to do and what do we do, right? Because this work is ongoing, and if another generation is going to inherit it, we have to make sure that we've engaged it as if it was an ongoing thing that we seek to stop over time and not something that can be avoided or coped with. There isn't enough of that in the day, in the world to help us do that. So I'm gonna speak to you all about, and hopefully we're just gonna have a conversation about what it is that that we feel like our next steps are. And the first question is to go to everybody, so everybody can engage in this. There is so much lip service being paid to anti-racism initiatives and organizations, but little has happened or changed. And I had this experience where I was involved in conversations with some of my peers who are leaders of organizations. And in the middle of the sort of franticness around the We See White American Theater and the Black Theater Network and all of these, reckonings that were coming, I remember thinking almost out loud, I didn't say it out loud, I don't know why you're gnashing your teeth. I don't really see you. I think the act is gnashing teeth, not actual change, right? I don't think y'all gonna do that work. So what does the doing of anti-racism work look like to the three of you? And what does dismantling white supremacist structures look like in the theater, in the professional sector, and on the collegiate level? And then what do we do to make sure that those things, that change is happening? And let's start with you, Sharrell.
Oh dear. You know, I think we know this, but one thing that needs to happen is that we need to throw out the curriculum and rebuild it. And I'm talking about, on the collegiate level. We continue to marginalize what some curricula call ethnic theater, or there's all of these diversity classes make up one DEI requirement. And my question is, well, what are you teaching in Theater History 1 and Theater History 2? So we need to infuse all of those classes with diversity, not even initiatives, with the history of theater, where it represents a broader array of folks other than white people. And what is something I've been toying with lately, and I'm gonna say this, and I mean it in the most loving way possible, is that I don't think theater educators realize how suddenly unqualified they are to be in front of classrooms, because they only know one history, and it's lies. So that's why that's why I'm working hard to help get the educators what they need, right? And I think some educators realize it as well, but you have to realize, and I'm speaking to the white folk right now, you got to realize that you're teaching lies, right? And now the students know that you're teaching lies. So everybody looking around crazy, going, okay, so if theater didn't began in Greece, where did it begin, and what can you tell me about Africa? And I'm talking about all the countries too, right? Not just Egypt. What can you tell me about sub-Saharan Africa? So we can work together as educators to help provide those tools to educators to say, this is where you can start. This is how you begin. And y'all already know I always talk about stolen legacy. So I'm not just going to leave that there and not let you know where you can start. But a good place to start is with stolen legacy to rectify where we say theater began. But ask yourself as educators, how qualified are you to be in front of your students? Look at your books, and we know, and then I'm be done. We know that white supremacist societies, or whatever society you live in, we know that the socialization, the educational structure has to uphold that society. So we're teaching white supremacist ideals, and it is all in the theater textbooks, and it's a whole bunch of lies, and I'm tired of it. I want to know about a whole bunch of other cultures, and I want to know a lot about a whole bunch of other cultures. That's where I'll start.
I love that. I love that. Nicole, do you want to speak to that next?
Listen, I had to grab my Black Power puppet fist. Okay. so much going on right there. Yeah, besides affirming, what you said, Sharrell, I was, as soon as I heard the question, I wrote down reclaiming my sanity. And then I wrote down changing the metrics from which I adjudicate a successful process, not a production, but a process, right? And that shift for me is constantly having to center my body and something that's been happening to me since the return of in-person work is this experience of, I guess the best way that I could describe it is a bit of like the statue of Atlas holding up the world, that I am using all of my knowledge to create a container that allows people to be liberated, to come with the fullness of themselves as defined by them, and engage in the work, meet the work where they are, and then let that work and themselves and the relationships be transformed. And what I'm finding in terms of anti-Blackness is that I am being attacked. People think I am holding up a world that I also don't want to be a part of. And so it becomes very interesting to me that I work in a way that doesn't allow that, because that was my before times. My before times was taking it. My before times, as you talked about, Nataki, was like coping with that, surviving it. And now I'm like, I'm not doing it, right? So there are the ways in which I am making sure that my boundaries that make me a part of and in the world that I am creating to hold for other people, a boundary that cannot be crossed, not by others or myself. Right. So, and I think that that's also coming from a place of great privilege. I have to name that in the space, that I have the power to quit jobs, to walk away, so to speak, that other people may not have. So I also want to name that in the space.
Thank you for that. I recognize all of that you just put down. Karen, do you want to speak to this a little bit?
Yes, I want to say a big yes and to everything that was said. The re-education of the educator, I think, is something that we have to devote a lot of time to, and that's like really interrogating what our ethos is. And I feel like, especially when we get into predominantly white institutions, we have some tenured folk who haven't looked at why or how they got their information. So now they are teaching, to Sharrell's point, misinformation about the world that we want to see and what our art form actually should have been to begin with. So I think about devaluing this product over process model, which I think is ingrained specifically in musical theater and in commercial theater. I think about rooms in which any room that I'm in has to be a room that is interrogating, but specifically like critically analyzing oppressive practices that have been baked into this is how it's done. And then specifically creating community. I find when we get into rooms with young artists, they haven't been cared for, they haven't been seen. And this is to Nicole's point. If you show them how they should be treated, they walk through the world a different way, especially in these artistic spaces. So I feel like modeling that I will meet them wherever they are. I don't care if you haven't read the classic. You know how to do this because you were alive. And specifically, if you come from ancestry, that then you know how to tell a story. So let me help you by giving you some guardrails, but then you tell me how you want to enter the space and be the storyteller that you were born to be. This is like, it's simple. That's the thing that I don't understand why there's so much resistance and pushback. And I think it has to do with those who have power and privilege are not in the driver's seat. And their years that they have sort of amassed with their research is not really applicable for this new world that I refuse to go back. Yeah. So I think that that's the thing. I yes and to everything that was said, but really, like, if you're an educator, you got to learn again. We know we didn't do it right.
It's interesting, I saw Trouble in Mind when it was on Broadway, and I'd read it before, but it's interesting to see it on Broadway, 65 years after it was supposed to premiere. And the sister, Alice Childress, who wrote it, is talking about these exact same things, and she's really engaging in a deep conversation about how do you reflect back to the Academy what it's doing to you, like, so that it can see itself. What do you all think about this idea of, because you said the Academy has to change, you change your own process so that you can be the point of transformation. that you have to, re-education of the educator and the things that they sort of stand on, and we're in this time where we're, because the question was about, from the collegiate to the professional sector, like what is the point of transformation, and how do you dismantle these structures? And the question is also, what do we do about it? Like, how do you shift it? If we're talking like, we're talking 65 years now of the same conversation in which there was this big charge to sort of shift everything and do something right and make it, bring equity to into these spaces where we do this work that we do. And so now we're at another sort of post-reckoning where, where the academy sort of performed something but did not necessarily shift. So in June of 2020, James Nederlander, the president of the Nederlander organization, faced backlash over thousands of dollars in donations to the former president and other GOP organizations. In response to that backlash, he pledged to donate $50,000 to Black Lives Matter. And so you have this is a good example of in the professional arena, somebody speaking out of both sides of their mouth. And the impact of those thousands of dollars against the work of an organization like Black Lives Matter is sort of really tangible, right? And so that's sort of how it works, right? I'm going to gnash my teeth over We See White American Theater, but then I'm not really going to change very much. What do you think we do to shift some of this so that at least generations from now there can sort of mark a moment of change?
We wait for action, I think I'm so tired of hearing, don't give me money. Don't tell me what you're going to do. Just show it to me. I mean, that Nederlander situation is really, really difficult for me to swallow because, I was one of the people that started reposting that he had given money. And he was on my phone within 48 hours, trying to explain to me why he gave the money, that it was his father, that he was doing it for his father. And, there were so many things to unpack about that conversation. But one of the things that I could feel in my gut was like, don't tell me that this is someone else's problem and then offer me money. And here we are, 2 years later. His father has been in the grave since 2016. And what is the assumption? That his father came to him as a ghost and said, you should also give money now to more Republican candidates so they can strip more rights away from the people that you are putting on your stage to tell stories and make you more money. I mean, when we talk about actionable items, this is start speaking with your dollars. Look, I don't want anyone to be out of work, but if these people are taking away your rights, possibly don't work for them. Maybe. And look, if you need that job, then come alongside the rest of us. Because we got lots of stuff to do.
Mm-hmm. What do you think of that, Dr. Luckett?
I use both pronunciations. So it's okay. I have a friend who was like, I am not calling you Luckett. Listen, another name change is coming soon. Another name change is coming. I guess I think about how disappointed I am in white folk and white dollars. I mean, but I shouldn't be surprised. I mean, like what Karen is talking about, it's not new. And I wonder why we continue. I want to have a real conversation with white people. I want them to admit what they really want. They show us, but they don't say it. And I think maybe let me see if I'm saying this right. I think maybe if we say, okay, y'all, listen, you lying to us. We know you lying. So let's come to the table and figure out how we can live harmoniously together with your lies. Because I'm tired of that's how I perceive it, is lies, right? That's what it is. It's a lie. Somebody tell you something that's not true. So what I'm trying to say is I hope we don't get stuck in the space of expecting. And I know I have to say this. I know there's some really good white folk in the world. but for some reason we just can't make the change that we need. And we've been in this spot, like you just said, Nataki, for a long time. And so I think we have to shift our expectations of them and of their dollars. What does that look like? I wish I could figure it out. You know, maybe we can figure it out right now in this hour. I don't know. But it's like having, you know, a sibling you don't get along with, and it's like, okay, cool. You don't want me in your room. I don't want you in my room. It seems like, so let's figure out how we can live in this house. We still got to live in this house together. So let's figure out how we can live in this house together. I'll give you some of my ham and cheese. You can give me some pork every now and then, you know, something where we can have a real conversation, but just the words are not matching up with the actions, like Karen is saying. And I don't want us as Black women, as women of color, to die from continuing, you know. And I think, Nataki, that Matrix reference you made, you know, how long can we bend, and how are we caring for ourselves, because we know that we die in the struggle, and I don't think our ancestors want us to die.
I also don't think our future generations want us to die. You know, I think that there's a need for us to hold this space. I'm gonna pivot a little bit to talk a little bit more about the Academy and how it's affecting our future generations. So for many of us, we were encouraged to seek, and I'm gonna start with you, Nicole, for this one. For many of us, we were encouraged to seek advanced degrees for validity in the industry. How do we feel now about continuing education, which often comes with an immense amount of debt for validation in the professional theater?
I feel like there's this real nuance for me in terms of where I'm at with that. Some people, it's a useful model for them to be working in, but I think, speaking very generally, right, having done no surveys or anything like that, I think there's a much larger population of people that it is a place of erasure, and it is a place of diminishment. And so their artistry cannot bloom in those conditions. It cannot grow. And so the debt is a very interesting conundrum, particularly if you were someone who is not a white male or a white female, because we have the data and we have the statistics that prove that the dollar is not the dollar for those bodies, for those identities, right? And so how is it that I am paying back this education? How do I continue to get work, right? And particularly if I have been erased, if I have been trained to work in roles that I will never get cast in, then what am I doing here? So there's that situation that I think is worthy of interrogation. There is also the situation in the United States of just a lack of funding, whether that's coming from the state or federal level, for our educational institutions, our conservatories, and our training places to be healthy, diverse, with cross-cultural curriculums. Like their money isn't there. And if the money is there, the money is not resourced in a way to flow where it needs to go for those spaces to be nutritious. And so people lean on that, you know?
Yeah, people do lean on that. And I have had many a conversation with a young person who, you know, they're nervous about not being able to get into some sort of graduate training program or undergraduate training program that will validate them for the field. And I remember when I was teaching, you know, because I was a part of that, you know, I led a lot of people through these programs that, you know, with the clarity that this is a field that is based on scarcity, that white supremacy requires scarcity in order for it to continue to maintain the hold of power, and that there were going to be so many people that, you know, that I would hope to push forward. But that ultimately it wasn't about the fact that there was a lack of talent in the world. And it really was about the lack of opportunity means that only a few people get to actually succeed and be at the top. And that was sort of the necessary part of it. And we had formulas in place as well, where, you know, we would I knew that during the economic fall in 2008, I knew that I was more likely to get affluent young white boys into the program because their parents would fund that before they would even fund the young white women. So I'm also curious about your thoughts about now that people, so they've gone to the academy and they've gotten their degree and now they're out in the world, but we have an exodus of people now. People are leaving the theater, and the theater in particular, to go to film and television or other forms of entertainment. What do we need to do to prepare and educate the next generation of theater makers and leaders of the global majority across the field? Dr. Luckett, would you like to speak to that?
Would I like to speak to that? Let's see here. I think, I mean, what I would like to see is, so I can speak to something I just started. Like, I started the Black Acting Method Society, and I'm gonna cry because I'm so proud of those students. I worked with students from Florida State University, Shenandoah Conservatory, and Temple University, because I wanted them to know that they have something that they can do. They have the artistic leisure to do what they feel like they need to do to get what they need to get. And it's a knowledge-based organization, so they don't feel the pressure of having to produce theater. So with that said, I think we need somehow more institutions like the Black Acting Method Studio. I found out about the Identity School of Acting. I don't know a lot about it. It's in London and Los Angeles, but things of that nature, more students going into HBCUs. And I know HBCUs can be very similar to PWIs. I know that. Thank you, Nataki. but I still think it's probably a more nurturing place than PWIs can be. And I think the last thing I'll say to that, so more institutions for students of color to get what they need. And because I always wonder, and I went to PWIs, but y'all know the stories. These stories sound like they come, they come in, like it'd be stories like Greek theater stories, like just monstrosities happening in these institutions. And so sometimes I wonder why students stay, and I know some of it is finance, and I realize it's a privilege to be able to leave, but I do wonder, like, how much pillaging, how much soul breaking can you take? You seem like you're literally about to die in these PWIs. Why won't you get out? And so I hope to help create places where they can go.
Yeah, I like this sort of focus on the fact that you might die from it. There was a question from this young person, Maya. I don't know if they're young or not. I didn't mean to say that. How do you stand in your power and maintain your health and physical and mental when bombarded with gaslighting, fragility, microaggressions, macroaggressions? It's exhausting, taxing, and depleting. So in this idea that we're in this academy and we got our golden ticket, we got into the top school that we wanted to get into, and now that we're here, we get there and there's this attack that's inherent in it, because the systems that are in place are meant to teach you how to funnel yourself through this one thing, but not how to be as complex and as dynamic as you are as you move through that. It's about shedding something of yourself as opposed to continuing to move forward. How do you maintain your health, your physical and mental health through this process? So all three of you are working in the academy. So all three of you have to do some sort of internal work that you're doing, but also you have to teach your students in a way how they might be able to continue to move through threading themselves to the possibilities to get to their ultimate goals. Karen, would you like to start with that?
Yeah, sure. I think it has a lot to do with, I treat my student like they came from me. And I know that there are boundaries that sometimes are crossed in that, and sometimes I deplete myself. But there is something that I gain in that, in knowing that I've changed a life by being there for them when they needed me. And then when in the space, I can speak specifically about the musical theater industry because that's where I came from and that's where I did my work and that's where I teach right now. There is so much of pitting the students against each other, and the comparison is so toxic. And so I really do, in the space, I try to get them to believe more like they are the collective. If this person doesn't succeed, it's because we didn't hold the space for this person to do the work. And so when we really start to like link our success to the person next to us, regardless of our skill set, then we start to take care of ourselves. And I think that's, you know, it's an experiment, truly. But I do see students starting to change the way that they exist in spaces. And also it changes what they choose to bring into the room. And I mean content, the songs that they want to work on. I think that that's it. I don't think that we can leave it to the institutions to create a safe space, because what we are seeing too is everybody wants, you know, students of the global majority to be a part of these institutions, but then they lack any of the infrastructure to hold their lived experience. I was one of those. I come from very meager backgrounds. I was dropped in a PWI, and then they were like, figure it out. And I was like, my family life is a hot mess. I have to stay in school because I don't really have a safe home to go to if I go back. And here you're harming me. So, you know, if we are really going to invite these students who have every right to be a part of the industry into these spaces, we have to devote real hard currency to supporting them mentally, physically. That I don't see. And so I try to create that. I try to create that safe bubble when they're in my space. And I haven't figured out how to keep myself from running on empty. And so if any of y'all have any ideas, or throw it in the chat, y'all. Look, I'm ready to learn.
Yeah, it's about the stealth work. I had this teacher when I was in graduate school who, you know, when I first got there with the Black students said, you know, so-and-so, I won't say the name of this person, but so-and-so isn't Black, you know, and I would be like, well, she look Black, you know, and they would be like, this is predates the skin folk and kin folk, you know, thing. And it's funny because years later, I realized all the ways in which that person held me. Like, I was like, she was clearing pathways and pulling money out of thin air and, you know, and like, you know, but at the time I was looking at her like, how come you're not being all the things I need you to be? You know, and I think that's also a part of what we end up doing is we take on our gigantic, you know, super cape, you know, and we pull out our umbrellas and we try to shield everybody from as much as we can. I'm very conscious of the ways in which she sheltered me through, right? But at the time there was no way for me to be conscious of that. She actually had to hide it, because years later when I was pulled into the provost's office and told that I was giving these Black women too much of my time and that I was favoring them, I had to ask the provost, you know, so are you actually dealing with this extremely marginalized group of people on your campus in a different way? Because I'll step back. If you're serving this group, like, I'll step all the way. Oh, you're not? Oh, okay, well then we don't actually have a conversation that we're going to have here, right? So it's this act of stealth work, right? That I think that a lot of us function under, ways in which we try to shelter people through. And I'm curious about the balance between the stealth work and the mental health and the physical health that the two of you balance, Dr. Luckett and Nicole. Like, how do you balance those for yourselves?
It's interesting because my response is the more accrued power that I have gotten that has also translated to money has financed my ability to be able to balance it through taking family vacations or taking a bit of a respite that I could not afford to do prior to 2019. So there's that I'm trying to grapple with and find. And also my kids just turned 10 and 8. So even before that, one of the things, when I was married, I am now divorced, but when I was married, I was able to go for walks because there was an adult in the house. So I was able to walk for an hour, sometimes 2 hours in the morning before my day got started. Once we separated and eventually divorced, you know, I couldn't leave my kids like that. So one of the top things that left was my own like kind of physical thing. So one of the things that I do after my workshops is I'll lay down on the floor for 5 minutes, or I try to just do a lap around my block. What's the small things that I can do? But I really think this idea of replenishment as through like being cared for, not just going to a place, but being able to have meals made for you, have a nice, clean spot, whatever service that it is that you need. Some people just need a pool, some people need a spa, some people need outdoor activities. Like that costs money. So being able to have that in my life is a real privilege. And it's one that I'm also trying to balance with what happens when I don't resource it with money. How do I get it? And that's the part where I'm lacking right now. I'm in a state of deficit.
I heard that. I heard you say deficit out loud. I heard that. I'm sending you some energy in that direction. Sort of hope to fill that space.
I think, gosh, I think a lot about Toni Morrison and her declaring that racism is a distraction. And Toni Morrison with that asks, which I ask my students all the time, what would you do if you weren't fighting racism? And I let that open me up to try to make sure my world isn't revolving around folks doing harm. And then I realize I'm tenured now, but I'll tell you all a secret that I do. One of my favorite things I do in the academy is to press delete. That delete button has helped me so much. I just refuse to let the energy into my inbox. And the thing about when you press delete, you'll find that people will email you again and maybe you'll be in a better space. But somebody else always has the email too that you deleted, and you just do that nice little, I can't find that email for some reason. The truth is I deleted it because I didn't feel like dealing with your bull today. But I just wanted to give that to some people. Just don't ever tell nobody that's what you're doing. But that has worked, and I have to. one of my close friends encouraged me to press the delete button. I'm being real serious. I started doing it, and it just really helped to dodge that energy. But I use Toni Morrison's question, what would you do if you weren't fighting racism? And sometimes that answer is to skate. I like to skate, even though I end up on my butt a lot. I do like to skate. So yeah.
Ooh, the delete button. Let's empower delete across the land. Let's go ahead and get that thing right on out of your email inbox. Just to sort of stretch this conversation, this part of the conversation a little bit further, there is a growing number of Black women being appointed to high-level leadership of positions across the field, associate artistic directors, a growing number. I'm not saying it's a high number, right? It's a growing number, which means that more than 3 is a growing number. And, me along with a couple of other artistic directors, Black women artistic directors, are having this conversation about it, because I had this experience when I was teaching that, we did all this work to bring in more students of the global majority into our school. But then I realized that the faculty wasn't really prepared for it. So they were being mangled. They'd arrive and then they'd be mangled in the process because the system actually wasn't prepared. They thought you just add something. So being of the global majority is additive to the system. It's not actually what the system was made for. And so I'm curious about your thoughts about this growing number of Black women in particular, but women of color being appointed in these leadership positions across the field. I mean, like in the last 3 months, there've been like 2 more appointees, not Black women, Black people, into Shakespeare theaters. So there's there's this moment where this is my specific question, where the question has to be asked: has the field prepared itself for the shift, right? As somebody who came into a previously only white-led organization, I can tell you that the organization was not really prepared, even though I kept saying, I'm Black and I'm a woman, it's going to be different, right? So all the things that you had prepared for my predecessor, no, that speech is for him. No, that writing is for him. no, that marketing campaign is for him. None of that applies because I'm a different person. I'm not going to be a white man. And the job doesn't make me a white man, nor does it give me white male privilege in any way, shape, or form. Right? So I'm asking you this question because I've had this experience where I was clear that they didn't know what it meant, right? And I get here and they're like, but it's all the same, right? You're not that different, and don't say those things about yourself. And I'd be like, you know what? That I'm Black and a woman. Let me say it out loud again, just so you understand that. I'm curious about your thoughts about that because I'm talking to three women who have both been in positions where you were at the top of your game, but and also have made decisions about how you were shifting it. And so I'm just so curious about what do you think about this growing number, and what does the field need to do to meet that? And just so you know, those of you who are listening in, I'm springing this question on. It just occurred to me in the last bit of conversation.
I was just making space. Go ahead,
sorry.
KO.
I
was making space.
I just want to point out that, my former self was definitely that of a female identifying individual, but now I stand in this space, in a non-binary space now.
Thank you for reminding me. Yes, thank you. I appreciate that.
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, I think there is the same sort of thing. It's like we're used to hearing male, female than we are non-binary. So I think that there is now, I've added something to the roster of my intersectionality that will keep me in a different category altogether. I do think I lean on a lot of grace and the education and honestly, what I'm seeing from a lot of colleagues that are thrust into these spaces that are not necessarily female identifying, but that are people of color, is that there has to be a support system. I think of it like the buddy system. I don't want to walk into any space unless I know I have a co-conspirator. It's very important because we will run up against the oppression that exists in all spaces. And so I think that actually pulls me out of a lot of things. And I really am that person who cracks the door and looks in. It says, is there any, we're the kind eyes. And if I don't see it, I shut that door and I leave. But that's the only way that I can keep myself from being mangled, to use your word.
Thank you, KO. And I apologize for gingering you in this conversation.
I just want to put into the space that in terms of my continuing on at Yale, it is because of a Black woman, Tamala Woodard, Chair Woodard, is the reason that I am there. And I thought it was vice versa. I thought, oh, this Black woman has come into this role. I'm gonna work to support her, and she has seemingly effortlessly, knowing that it is at great cost to her, supported me and supported me taking the space that I need to take to heal for the whirlwind of my first year in that institution, finding my own feet, so to speak, of what I want to do and how I want to be, rather than being like the poster child of the anti-racism that is so, quote unquote, a high commitment. And yet, I am who I am right now because of Black people, and that is facts. When I couldn't get a job directing, Ron Himes hired me. That's the, St. Louis Black Rep is the poster that's on the wall back there, with nothing more than a conversation and me saying I was a director, right? So I'm very clear about the chances and the risks that people of color have taken on me for me to get to where I am. And I'm also very clear about making sure that white people don't get credit for shit they ain't done. So that's important for me to name legacy and lineage in terms of how I show up. And I think something too, Nataki, that I have heard you speak about in the past is that community that extends outside of Ashland for you, whether it was the folks that all got appointed artistic director at the same time and calling each other and supporting each other. And I think that's really important. If the community doesn't exist, then, KO, to your point, find those kind eyes elsewhere to get through what it is that you're going through. And some of those people might not be folks you actually know. I just got a text message today with a person sending me a picture of me with Anjina, who was a contestant on RuPaul's Drag Race. RuPaul's Drag Race saved my life in graduate school. You have no idea. So like going to Chicago to meet Anjina was everything for me. So it's like, even that was community found through television and that particular show. But the thing that fed my spirit let me know that it was okay to be audacious and unapologetically me in the ways that I showed up in the world. So I just put that out there for folks too. If you don't actually have folks, what's nutritious for you in terms of art or storytelling that'll keep you going until you can find your people.
Yes, what is nutritious? Ain't that right? Dr. Luckett, did you want to add something to that?
I mean, I think briefly, I'm thinking about cluster hiring, and I think there's research out there that says that that's really beneficial. And I think that we just we just need to hire people of color and make space. That's something I find myself constantly explaining to some white people, is how they might not fit this box. Like, you're still hiring, I'm in English, so like you're still hiring a medievalist, you know what I mean? And so what does that mean about your program that you're hiring a medievalist, in these times? So I think hiring a whole bunch of people of color, and like echoing what y'all said, not leaving folks there by themselves. And Nataki, I'm thinking too deeply about what you were saying about almost white folks vetting Black folks and people of color to see how Black they are. You know what I mean? And really they just want the color, but they don't want the culture,
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I'm glad that you've been explaining that to them. You know what I mean?
Or just living it, or just living in it, just having experiences where I had to just remind them that I don't make the difference. You make the difference. I just got up and went to work today. You're the one caught up in the difference. You know what I mean? It's interesting because I'm gonna pivot to this, but I'm gonna use this as a kind of bridge, and thinking about some people who got their degrees from the academy and their experiences in those places, and this idea that they're looking for a way to express what their experiences were like or not. I'm thinking about playwrights like Jeremy O. Harris. I'm thinking about Brandon Jacobs Jenkins. I'm thinking about the more controversial. I remember back in the day, Susan Lori Parks was considered to be controversial, in particular within the Black literati. There was a sense of somehow betraying the sanctity of what could happen behind closed doors and inside of kitchens, and while people were being soothed through grease and cornbread, there would be this other thing that you did not show to people. You did not expose yourself, or you did not expose that other side of Blackness, in particular Blackness, because you were going to, not represent the race well, or make a list of all the ways in which, that would be to our detriment. And so my next question is about, slave play, or plays by Susan Lori Parks, like Death of the Last Black Man in the Entire World, or Venus, which at the time were considered to be pretty controversial, or Brandon Jacobs Jenkins' Neighbors, and Octoroon. So the question on the table is, why are we still allowing white audiences to vet our works, or is this even vetting? Or is it more about voyeurism, giving them a peek on some side? And how do we continue to make space for audiences with similar cultural backgrounds to share in a theatrical experience together without the white gaze? Because the thing about slave play, and I'll just use that one as an example because it's a more recent one, is I went to see it at the New York Theater Workshop, and because of my background in history as a director, the work that I've done, and the people that I worked with, because of that, my framing was different. But it didn't change the fact that I sat in that all white room and I looked in that, there's this mirror that you can see everybody else in the audience. And so it's like picked out, it's like me and you. And then there's like, I don't know, maybe. And then like, definitely, you're like, there's like 7, people of the global majority visibly, because you don't know, you can't, people don't wear tags that say, right? So you're sort of counting. And then I spent the whole entire production, the whole play with this lady sitting next to me, this white woman, and she kept like waiting to see if I was laughing, to see if she could laugh, so that I was like, just watch your plays. I'm gonna watch my play, you're gonna watch your play. But my experience of it though was this is a metaphor of the experience that you have within the academy. I had the same experience there was a real controversy around the television show Them. There was a real controversy. They were going to cancel Lena Waithe, right? She's got to be canceled, right? When actually my experience of that, I was like, well, that feels like integrating, the American theater, so it's, you reflect on it in different ways. I can relate it to something that I've experienced. But that doesn't change the fact that once it's exposed, there is a way in which I think there's a fear around making that kind of experience normal, for the white gaze. And then the last thing about that is, in particular, because Jeremy O. Harris's play focuses on a real traumatic moment that a Black woman experiences. There's a lot of feelings about whether or not this should be exposed, and who gets to see it, who pays for that experience, and who actually ultimately pays for it in the end. I mean, who pays for the ticket, and then also ultimately who is the victim of that experience night after night after night after performing it. And so the question is it vetting? Is it voyeurism? Is it different when these pieces are in all Black spaces, like you go see a Tyler Perry play or a Tyler Perry film in a Black movie house? It's a different experience than if you move down the street to where white folks mostly go see theater. I mean, go see film. And the same is true of his theater. So I'm just curious about your thoughts about this, and I'll allow any one of you to engage in that question.
Like, hold on, let me get my hair out my microphone. So I would just say, for me, I am now centering myself and my artistic practice on, is something medicinal or not, and for whom. And I read Slave Play because I happened to be at the O'Neill. I read it. I also saw it when it was being workshopped there. And there were a lot of things that came up for me. And ultimately, it comes down to what you just said, Nataki, the cost. And it doesn't matter for me who is creating the material if ultimately the equation still puts white people on top. And so I have to ask those questions of, when we produce it, what is our responsibility and our accountability to the Black body that has to see it? And that's it. It's not that it shouldn't be done. What is our responsibility? And I think for where I am at right now, there is work that can happen on the directorial side, either in terms of how you hold a space and set a space. There is work on the artistic director side about that space, but also endings are just as important as beginnings. So what are you having people do at the end of that? And I know that there are different ways in which people engage in this. My artistic practice is, if something's going to be somewhere and I know that it is going to stir up blood memory or stir up trauma, then I do have a responsibility to create a space even after that allows people to just hold it. I don't know that it's necessarily possible to transmute it, but to at least engage that it is there. And I'm finding less and less that happens, that I'm in these spaces, watching these plays, consuming this stuff, excited to support Black people. And then I'm like, oh shit, you haven't thought about my body consuming this or holding this in any way. And then the conversation, when it goes to that, when that information is given to the playwright, when that information is given to the director, when that information is given to artistic director or whomever, is met with criticism. And I'm like, y'all not hearing what's really being told here. So I think for me, that's my opinion and where I'm at right now of like, it's not about it shouldn't be done, but I think it needs to be done with a stronger ethic of care and love for Black people, rather than the dollar that is coming from the validation, the temporary, superficial validation of money.
So there's a statement in here in the chat. Yes, that's my thinking as well. This is Jonathan Matthias Lassiter. Who is being served here? Is this healthy or trauma porn? What is our responsibility to the Black person? Yes. You know, I have this question about this idea of trauma porn because I've only heard it attributed to Black stories. I've actually never experienced anybody call stories about the Holocaust trauma porn. Or other, other kinds of stories that feature the kind of traumatic experience that people have as a people, right? It's very specific to Blackness, and I'm of a couple of minds myself, but I'm always very curious because it usually only ever comes up with Black people, and we do it to ourselves. I heard somebody. A young person once told me that they didn't want to do slavery porn. And I was like, so is it because it's a conversation about slavery that it's pornographic? Because pornography is the sort of exploitative focus of one thing, despite all the other things that are in it, just that one part of it, right? So it's this exploitation moment, is talking about it, trauma porn, is having an experience of engagement trauma porn. And what makes it pornographic? And so my question still stands, like, is it because it's related to Blackness in particular? Any thoughts about that?
I see Karen's face.
I do too. I'm looking at
no, that's a good.
I'm looking at you right now.
But this is the thing. I don't identify as a Black person, but when I won the Tony Award, a lot of people were like, oh, it was because that scene in Docs where you were raped. And I was like, and when someone said trauma porn, I was like, oh, you want to see this brown body under duress. And that is exciting to you. And that's worth giving me an award for. And when I look at the work that I've been lauded for, it is me suffering. So I don't know that I would, maybe it's because I'm in this body and I've done work that I've gotten reviews for. They're like, yay, we love to see you in pain, KO. But from your experience, obviously you're hearing it in these spaces, but I think it has to do with suffering, the human body suffering for a ticket price. But that's just my experience.
Yeah, I think that's the question still stands though, right? Because when we watch white people, because like all the plays are about white people suffering for something, right? Is that pornographic?
I see what you're saying, Nataki. I'm gonna have to think about it more.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a real answer in this moment. So maybe I need to just think about it more. But I mean, I think it might do with what KO just said about people of color always having to be in traumatic situations to be able to perform. They feel like they don't have any other outlets, like we have a full history. But I also hear what you're saying, how we don't classify other people's trauma as trauma porn. But I'm also thinking about how white people get this 360 range, this full, we see them in all of these facets. And when you get to Black people and people of color, it's usually flatter. It usually is I think what am I trying to say? I think what I'm trying to say
is about access and opportunity.
That's what I'm trying. There we go. There we go. Access and opportunity, and do you get that full range as people of color to play many things versus always playing playing those traumatic types of roles. And I mean, speaking to slave play, I don't know Jeremy Harris. I don't have anything against him. I heard he was friends with Rihanna too. So this is a joke, y'all, but I did hear that. But you know, slave play is one of them plays that I've never seen it. I admit that, but I have read it. And it's traumatic for me. And I just wonder, Dr. Lassiter is actually he's in the Black Acting Method studio. I wish he could speak to it. And he's a mental health practitioner. He's a psychologist, a clinically trained psychologist. And he always talks about what is our responsibility to also give people the place to heal. And when I read Slave Play, I was just gutted as a Black woman. And I didn't understand. And I know me and you have had this conversation, but I didn't understand why. I didn't understand how in the world it could make it to the stage without some rewrites or something. And I still.
But then you also can understand how that, right?
Yes, that's true. That's what I was about to say.
You can. Yes.
And I can understand how it would make it to the stage with that type of material. But good grief, it's. I just was like, what in the world is going on in Jeremy's head where these things, it's a strange loop. It feels like I haven't seen a strange loop, but it just seems like it's this strange thing happening in his head where I wonder about mental health comes into play, because why would you, we also know that the Black woman, people are, like to say that we're unprotected, we're mistreated. There's no repercussions to what happens to us, and it feels like it's the Black woman that just completely gets pulverized in slave play in ways that I raise my hand as a Black woman and just be like, why?
In the same way that Susan Lloyd Parks was also, I mean, for Venus in particular, there was a similar kind of instinct around, this woman who, in the thesis of that piece, people felt like she was saying that she was also participating in her own demise. And that was what they had attributed, that idea that she was creating a character who had participated in her own devastation. And that was actually not fair to Black women to present that. And I don't know, because I don't know, I haven't spoken to Susan Laurie about that particular piece, about whether or not that was her intention or not. But I do know that people felt like that's what she was doing.
And I do want to say, I don't think he wrote it for Black people. I think he wrote it for a white audience. That's what, when I was sitting there, I saw it before, in the 4 times, before I had grappled with my own anti-Blackness. And then in the after times, I went back and saw it, and I was like, oh, you didn't write this for anyone who actually sees himself as a person of color. You wrote this for a very specific audience. We never should have been, I think, my opinion, I don't think we ever should have been in the audience, because it's just too harmful.
That's interesting, because I do have friends who went to see it on the blackout nights. He was the one that really sort of to promote that in New York, that like really fought to make sure that on Broadway there were Black people in the space. And those people, my friends who went to see it on those nights had a completely different experience. So I don't know if I can say that he didn't write, who he wrote it for, because I haven't asked him that. But I do wonder, because I feel like there are all kinds of ways to commit to a storytelling, right? But the question is about this idea of voyeurism, that we become very protective of the way in which we're engaged. And I like this, that the answer might have something to do with whether or not there are enough opportunities, so that there's a range of experience. So for example, here at OSF, before I got appointed artistic director, the people who were here actually worked very hard to make sure that, OSF commissioned Confederates, which just opened at the Signature. And there was a real conversation here about whether or not they could, here in Ashland at Oregon Shakespeare Festival, do a play that focused on an enslaved Black woman, without having anything else in the season to balance it. And that has to do with a real, an understanding about who your audience is, and whether or not, there are people in the audience who would like to go back to those glory days or not, And knowing that, you know, you had very little control over that, you wanted to have an offering that balanced it. So there was a real consciousness around making sure that that was not produced into a void, in which the only offering in the season that focused on Blackness in particular was this one, you know, where people would be like, oh yeah, you played the slave in that, right? And that would be the end of the conversation. And that provided opportunity here. So there were multiple plays that focused on Blackness. So I think this question about voyeurism is connected to opportunity. Am I getting that right? And so is that the answer? Is to if we're gonna, because I don't know, and I'm not trying to stop, you know, Jeremy's play from happening in the world, right? But is the answer also saying, hey, Academy and industry and, you know, commercialized theater spaces, can you do more than one thing at the same time? So that brings me to last fall, where there was an unprecedented, I think 6 or 7 number of plays by Black writers that were produced. You know, Broadway reopened its season with Passover, right? Thoughts of a Colored Man and Trouble in Mind, and you know,
The chicken and grits play. Chicken and
right,
grits.
yes, yeah, that one as well. There's one after the other, after the other, after the other, right? And that's unprecedented. Is that the what we're looking for? You know, because it did offer a wide array of offerings, and I believe that it was meant to bring in local audiences, read people of color, to Broadway, because they can't rely on the folks coming in from everywhere else to come in.
That felt like optics to me. I'm going to be really, coming from the commercial theater, that felt like we've had a reckoning. They're like, how do we keep our doors open? We don't know how to do COVID, but we could get people sick. That felt like they put a bunch of bodies of color up and said, can you test out this model for us? And we'll get all of our sound bites, and everyone will say, look, we're giving Black people and brown bodies work, and we'll figure out how to make this work for when we get the white people and the revivals that we now see rolling through. Now we'll know how to do it without losing people. That's what that
KO,
like.
You're just as cynical as I am. I was like, that's about money, right? Because if you know that Jim and Nancy aren't coming in from Iowa, but you do know that Rayshawn and Rashida are coming around the corner from Brooklyn, you making plays for Brooklyn to come, right? I don't know if we were, I thought it was economics. We need to make some money. Let's get the people in here, right? Because just like any other organization, all of Broadway could be sued for placing people in harm's way. We also opened last year, and we did. I presented a play called Fanny. I opened the Elizabethan Theater with a play called Fanny: The Life and Music of Fannie Lou Hamer. And that was also to say, I can open this space with Black people and put Black people on stage and feature Black stories, but I'm maybe not like my colleagues that I will continue to do that. It wasn't a bait. It was like, you know, let me just make sure that everybody's clear about my motives. But I was just as cynical. What about the two of you? What'd you say, Nicole?
I said, yeah, without a doubt. Everything KO said.
I think I don't know. Y'all probably know there of the ways that you can figure out who said that this play should be produced. But I'm always wondering, you know, whenever I hear about a play that hits Broadway, or I'll even pull Disgraced in here by Ayad Akhtar. You know, when I read Disgraced, I was like, oh my, you know, I was just so scared for the Muslim community. I really was. I was like, oh my God, what do you mean this was the most produced play, you know? So even though all of those plays came in not after, but during the pandemic, when we still acting like it ain't no pandemic, later part of the pandemic, I'm still wondering what plays get produced. I'm still seeing us only, I won't say only, but vetting a lot of the playwrights from the Ivies. And we know the Ivies are, you know, they're always Plato, Socrates, Aristotle. If you're not Plato's, if you're not one of them, they're not interested in nothing you're talking about in your education or in your dissertations. So I'm still invested in that conversation. Who saw this and who said it should be produced? I'm more interested in what Black artistic directors like you, Nataki, said that you did, and what Black companies are coming back with, like True Colors Theater, like the St. Louis Black Rep, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Like Repertory Theater of St. Louis, which is also run by a Black woman, who
Okay,
brought back Dreaming Zinzele, and there's, so but it's an interesting conundrum, right? Because when we do put those plays on in these PWIs that we run, there is this question about whether or not what we're doing is committing to an act of allowed voyeurism, and is it more voyeuristic when, because I mean, the act of watching a play is you're seeing things, right? So there's something about the voyeurism that's real, but this other part of it that is, can we tell stories that talk about enslavement? Can we tell stories that talk about our pain? Can we tell stories that talk about our joy? And can those things, and there are all kinds of other things, can we tell stories about? But are those things allowed in these spaces? And are we making the space and allowing for that as well? So what you just said just led me to something, a question about working with Afrocentricity in the acting classrooms, like during scene work or plays you might produce as theater schools. I personally, I'm okay with white students portraying people of the global majority in scene work that they do. And this is partially for me. Why? It's because I've had these experiences with my white students who felt like the classroom was actually a space for them. And that my students of the global majority, they would be like given an opportunity within that space. But I had a student say to another student, well, they'll find something like August Wilson for you, but don't worry about it. You'll have a seat. She's given me this, but she's going to give you that thing over there. So that works for you. So what I did was in the next semester, I just made everybody do August Wilson. And the question was, do you have the ability within your skill set to embody the circumstance these people are living in, right? Can you do that? And they were all worried about, whether or not they would be playing caricatures. And I was like, well, you could play a caricature because you have the ability to exaggerate how people behave in circumstance, but you can also play the truth. And my class is about the truth. So what I need you to do is focus on that. What is the truth of their circumstance? Because first year is all about that, right? Can you just play in a circumstance? Can you play in the circumstance? Do you understand? Can you actually scan this text to figure out what the circumstance is? And so I'm curious about what happens when this question about appropriation, when we put the focus on the global majority in the theater classroom and the work of the global majority in particular, what are the options that we have, when we have global majority students in white spaces? We talk a lot about whether or not those students are given the opportunity to work on pieces that they would later on be given opportunity to audition for. But then also, does that mean that they should only work on that? Should they work on these pieces by people who are not in the global majority? And our white students also, do they have the inability to be able to engage in the material, because what it does is it ghettoizes something within the academy. It says this is for everybody, but this is for you. And so I'm just curious about your thoughts on that. Dr. Luckett, you want to start with that question?
Yeah, that's something, thanks for asking. That's something that the studio, we talk about Afrocentricity a lot, and it really frees us up teaching the Black students to put yourself first. Because Black students and students of the global majority, I appreciate you bringing that in there too. I always say that they're taught to sacrifice themselves for white students in the classroom. They're taught that they can do, that they'll go ahead and play the white role, and who knows what they're thinking in their heads as actors, that process to do that. And they also don't want to appear to be a problem. But I say that that's centering white students. What happens when you center yourself? And with that, I have not done it on stage yet, but I do let my white students play actors' roles of the global majority, especially if I have a student from the global majority that needs this acting opportunity. And the other thing I always say to them, is that the easiest thing for you to play should be a human, another human, right? Why can't you play another human? What is the problem? You know, and also I don't let my white students, you know, it's so interesting how they're so interested in appropriation at the collegiate level, but when they get in the professional world, they be ready to play everybody and their mama. You know, so it's also this political act happening around, oh, I shouldn't appropriate, but if somebody asks you to do it once you graduate, you're down to do it. And what are you doing in that process? Because it completely flips outside of the academy. But that's why, and the other thing too is that if you look when you're doing these plays, if you shouldn't even have to look that deep, but if you do your history and your dramaturgy on these plays, you'll find that all people existed during this time period. They might have just been right down the street, right? And maybe the character name didn't make it into the play or whatever, but they are in that world. And so you can find, I did the Diary of Anne Frank one time and had Black students in the play, and we did our research and we found out Black folks died in the Holocaust. Aha, there you are, right? So it's not a lie. You're actually playing your people who died in the Holocaust.
Nicole, you want to speak to that? I'm watching your face. I'm seeing you hold your heart for a moment.
I just like, it's really complex for me. I think one of the things that some of the actors that I'm working with brought up was also, so I want to speak to that. What does it mean to have had a completely different lived experience and be handed Wilson, as if that is something that they could easily find, right? And so there's also that offer for not us, but for people who might be present here or have colleagues who think the answer is a Black scene, a Black play for that Black body, rather than the answer being a conversation that allows someone to reveal where they're at in the intersection and exploration and development of their identities. What is it that they need to work on? What is it that they need to grapple with? What questions do they need to be asking themselves that's going to help deepen their artistry? And I think there are not enough people, and that's the full spectrum, that have the skill set to facilitate a space that ultimately will not end up harming Black people in the putting on of the humanity of another person, because they are so inundated with stereotype. So you've got to go through the peeling and the shedding of the stereotype to get to what you just said, Dr. Luckett, which is the humanity, to be able to see the person. And the way that the institutions that I've worked at, you're moving at such a fast clip and such a fast pace that I have the skill set, but I don't have the time to do that. So it's really difficult, I think, in terms of even myself and expanding my own edges of what I think people can explore. But yeah, I agree. So much to unpack.
Yeah, I find it really interesting because I, of course, have had, all the years that other people were here casting all kinds of bodies in Shakespeare at OSF, but of course I'm indicted for it here because of my thoughts about casting and sort of enacting that in these spaces. And why can't we do it the way it was done? And it was like, so it should be done then, all male, and they should all be from Britain. Is that that's the way it was done? So what do you mean by the way it was done? And I think the same is true about this. I directed a Fences years ago that a multicultural cast as well. I mean, really, literally multicultural. Like the phraseology of that, it was appointed to the time that I did it in. And when I look back on that time, part of my question was had to do with the reason why I taught it, which is if we're saying that there's this idea of the academy, who is it limited to and what are the voices, right? Because otherwise they go from something like Mamet to Chekhov to Shakespeare, right? And that's it. And that's like their whole experience, right? And so creating the space in which that is not the end of their experience and sort of broadening that. And I taught undergrads, just to be clear. So what they're engaging in is something completely different than they do on the graduate level. So I have one last question, and I know we're getting close to the end of time, but it has to do with this report about this Actors Equity report about actors in particular of color, sort of still, now there's still coming in with less resource, less opportunities. Were you all able to read that article? I wanted to know if any of you wanted to share your thoughts about, why is this sort of, it's repeating, right? So, because I believe that the model is scarcity, and I think scarcity is connected to white supremacy. So as long as we sort of make sure that only a few people feel like they can make it wherever this direction is that we're heading in, then people working for less money, being placed in these places of harm within our industry as a kind of deterrent to sort of keep some of us from moving through and staying in, this industry. What are your thoughts about it? Any one of you can pick up that thread.
I think that there's a question of what success is, because that's the thing here. Like we can all, like I've heard it said so many times, we can find ways of making money. This is our chosen profession. And I think that we keep looking at a very specific part of the industry, commercial theater, a very specific sector to validate us. And so we keep stepping into these spaces over and over again when we know harm is coming to us. So it's a personal thing. You have to figure out for yourself, like, how are you going to value your art? And does it have to be on a street in New York City in the center of Manhattan? Or at this highly lauded, regional theater somewhere in which they're going to pay you what they want to, not what they can. And are you going to are you going to perpetuate this cycle of being underpaid for your artistry? And that's a specific and personal thing that I think that working actors are not ready to really interrogate for themselves, because they're still looking for validation from an industry.
I would have to say, my 2 cents is just the industry is racist. I say this in my approach and my training all the time. The theater industrial complex is racist. Racism is a form of abuse. Abuse causes harm. If we are expecting the industry that doesn't know how to be anti-racist, hasn't been built to be constructed anti-racist, and as a matter of fact, has been fortified with the mutations of racism so that white supremacy may persist. If we are waiting for that industry or those unions to be anti-racist, we will be waiting generations into the future. And so I am of this thinking now around how unhealthy it is in the United States, this idea of immortality, that something should live on forever, rather than having a balanced approach of mortality, grieving, and letting something sunset. And the whole damn thing, in my opinion, could sunset. And what could come out of that are communities reestablishing what it means to be medicinal through their art. We started this conversation of talking about people's divine and inherent right to tell stories and all of the obstacles and the blockades that get in the way of that, of which this industry is set up for that. And I am speaking as someone who was doing anti-racism before it was cute, to someone who started to be called on when it was cute, to like really seeing the commodification of this healing. My work is about healing myself. It is not about, some of the ways that I have seen it utilized in the field as a shield to protect people from doing their own damn healing. So that's just where I'm at. I'm just like, this industry is never going to be what it could be because it wasn't set up to be what I need it to be. And so how am I out here, to your point, KO, by my own actions, modeling my own healing and investment in myself, an invitation for others to do the same.
Sharrell.
Amen. Amen. Yeah, I like the sunset. It's time for it to be over. And I was sharing with I believe talking to KO and Nataki earlier about, you know, how I was a little happy. I'm so sad about all of the death that happened in COVID, but the death of the theater industry that happened when COVID hit, I was actually happy that you know, I'm sorry that people lost work and folks suffered, but it was something that needed to be shut down. And I'm wondering if we're going to be able to come back as we're trying to come back. And I really appreciate KO you talking about the use of Black bodies and people of the global majority to experiment to see how can we come back to Broadway. But is it something that we need to let go? And I know someone mentioned dissolving board of directors at one point. I feel like I heard that somewhere, you know, actual actionable steps, because board of directors aren't helpful, and they're gatekeepers in different types of ways, and not being afraid. So I think that Nicole and KO and Nataki said it all, and I'm just echoing that. And that's something that I heard in grad school too, that I appreciated about things don't have to last forever. They don't.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. And it's such an important point. You know, one of the things that I kept, you know, I just met this theater, you know, when the pandemic happened, and I sort of see the pandemic stoppage as a reset. That there were some systems that, you know, it gave me an opportunity to really evaluate that I wouldn't have if it had kept going. So I'm grateful for the reset, even though the reason for the reset was so terrible, and for so many people. And I'm watching this great resignation. I'm very conscious of the fact that before the pandemic, there was this sort of beginning of this people trickling away from the theater, right? Moving, you know, more strongly into film and television. All of my writer friends are writing, are in writers' rooms. You know, my actor friends, you know, are figuring out how to find the balance, you know, and sometimes not looking for a balance, actually looking for a way out. And so my last question is about our next steps. What do we do? You know, because you know, I've loved the theater since I was 13 years old. I've been doing this since I was 13. And I've loved it, like not just doing it, but like actually, you know, wanted to be a theater artist from as far back as I can remember. And so, and I know that there are some young people out there, if you're not going to be a theater artist, I don't want it to happen because of discouragement. You make a decision to shift, right? But it can't be predominantly because of discouragement. And I was leaving the theater before I got this job, just so y'all know. I was on my way, like both feet were on the other side of the threshold. You know, the universe decided to tether me. You know what I mean? And that's my profound love for this organization, for this industry, is that that's my tether. And so, how do we create, and what are the steps that we take as educators and makers? What do we do to create the pathway so that a generation that is seeking this can find it and move it forward? And what are the things we need to do in order to create a stable ground for that? It's not going to be perfect because that doesn't exist. But, you know, what is that stable ground so they can make things and do things in these rooms that we can't even imagine because we're never going to be there? My grandmother used to say, the only thing I can promise is that in 100 years, they're going to be all new people. So what do we do for those new people in 100 years? What do y'all think?
I guess I'll go first. I think it has to do with removing our expectations of commercial theater, getting back into the academy, but really building up these incredible talents to understand what their capacity is and for them to be the gauge of their capacity, as opposed to these Afrocentric or these Eurocentric ideas of what acting should be. Those limits have to be removed. I kind of also think that until the stakeholders of commercial theater are removed, the harm will still be there. So I don't really care how much money you've given. I would like you to step aside. That I understand is a hard thing to say because New York is built on it. But we're still going to have the same issues unless we see people sort of removing themselves. If they can't learn how to do it equitably, then they should just sit aside. I think that's it. It seems very clear to me.
Move to the side. What y'all think?
Thinking about the collegiate level, I just think that there needs to be more space for students to create. Again, going back to the curricula, like something I know, I don't know how it's going, but something I know that UCLA implemented a couple of years back is that their first, I believe it's their first year MFAs have to devise a piece, or it might be the BFAs. But I want actors to create more. I want to hear what the upcoming generation has to say versus continuing to give them scripts. And people continue to ask, well, how are they going to analyze a script? And I continue to say, let them read it. I don't understand why it's so hard to analyze scripts. Read it, look what's going on, see who said what. You know what I mean? Look at the environment, figure it out, right? But I'm not saying script analysis isn't important. I'm just saying read the script. So I'm more interested in devised work and having students create more to see what they're really thinking about, because they are the future. So I don't know if that's laying a foundation down, but I tend to look to the future for the future.
Create, as the sister just said.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
My 2 cents is what I put into the chat. And also just, I feel really very deeply about like, what is your anti-racist politic, which comes down in my approach of asking people what their anti-racist theater ethos is. And if you cannot be clear about that, if that is not something that you can articulate for yourself, right, then there's work to be done. It is so important to be specific about what it is that you are showing up to do, knowing that because there are all of these people, everybody's take on it is going to be different. And it's that web that makes the industry tighter. So the work that we need to do with our designers and breaking down the hierarchies that exist with designers, breaking down the hierarchies that exist within MOPEC or motion picture, television, film, streaming platforms. Like, this industry is large, but we're not going to get to where we need to be if we are constantly checking the other person and finding fault. I can say, as the identities that I show up with, that I am still uprooting anti-Blackness up out of myself. So I don't have time to be checking for my neighbor and finding fault necessarily, like all my time in them. I can hold them accountable, and I want to be clear about that. I can hold them accountable to the harm that they are doing and the impact that they are having on myself and my beloved community. And I need to be doing my own work, expanding my own edges so that I can create a pace, as your grandma say, for these 100 years, these other new people that is not at the same place. Again, we said earlier, children's work, as if it was written right now, that is hugely problematic. Art is to reflect our times, and our times must move on. Other than that stagnation, we fail to thrive. So those are my 2 cents. I'm gonna get right on down off my soapbox.
I love your soapbox, though. It's about co-liberation, and it's about creating this opportunity for co-liberative practice so that I can be liberated and you can also be liberated as we move forward and look for ways to continue to engage. The funny thing is that, right, this is I don't know if you all learned this, but back in the day, they used to tell us that theater was a dying art form. And I was like, so it's like perpetually dying, which is kind of beautiful. That means it can be perpetually resurrected. And it can be perpetually resurrected through the practice of trying to relocate what the motivation is and how our humanity can be derived from it and how our humanity can give to it. And that's, part of why do you do this is so that we can engage and evolve and connect and then remind and rinse and repeat. Generations from now, they're going to do it in different ways. Thank God, because we're doing it in different ways than my generations back. Let's keep moving. Thank you all so much for this time and this conversation. Yes, all the words.
Thank you,
Dr. Luckett, for the invitation to engage with this
Thank you.
amazing group of minds. I appreciate you so much.
Absolutely. Thank the three of you, Nataki, Karen, and Nicole. This has been wonderful and amazing. And I know folks are asking about a recording. We will see and we'll figure out how to distribute that if we decide to distribute it. So much generative conversation, and hopefully we can have this in person. But this is why Zoom is helpful too. We're in different parts of the country and we're able to talk and stuff. And it'll be great to be in conversation in person as well one day. Y'all have been wonderful. This has exceeded my wildest expectations. And thank you to the wonderful audience members. We good? All minds and bodies clear?
Yes.
All right, y'all have a good night. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.